It's been exactly 100 years since Paris last hosted the Summer Olympics. So what's changed at the Olympics between now and then? A lot. And we're comparing the 1924 Paris Olympics to the 2024 Paris Games, looking at differences in things like the events, competitive breakdancing anyone, security, the venues, and even the technology being used to bring it all into your living room. So let the games begin. The opening ceremonies. To add some context, while in 2024 you can watch the opening ceremonies on your TV, smartphone, or tablet, back in 1924, unless you were there, you would only be able to read about it in a magazine, newspaper, or a book after the fact. The 1924 Games didn't just kick off in a big way, they also ended that way, as this was the very first time the modern Games featured a closing ceremony. Thanks to the previous Games in Antwerp, Belgium in 1920, ceremonial protocols such as the declaration of official opening by the head of state, playing the Olympic anthem, lighting the Olympic cauldron, and the Parade of Nations had already been established and provided Paris with a playbook to follow. One distinction for Paris 1924 is that these were the last Olympics in which Greece did not enter first in the Parade of Nations. A change made as a nod to the role of that nation in developing the ancient Olympic Games that the modern version pays homage to. A century later, spectacle reigns supreme, like the 2008 Beijing ceremonies that featured a 4-hour routine with 15,000 performers, or the London 2012 opener that was pop culture heavy with appearances by Daniel Craig's James Bond and Rowan Atkinson's Mr. Bean. Paris 2024, meanwhile, will up the ante by featuring the Parade of Nations on water instead of land. This will include a parade route stretching nearly 4 miles long down the River Seine. Nations will be transporting the teams of athletes by boat, with the banks of the river sectioned off by country to display each one's colors and traditions as they pass. Let's just hope none of the swim teams get too excited and try to take a dip in the river along the way. Venues and infrastructure. Of course, once the dust settles on the opening ceremony, it'll be time for the Games to fully begin, and the centerpiece venue from the 1924 Games will actually be participating in 2024. Constructed on a horse racing track in 1907, Stade Yves du Manoir accommodated over 40,000 people for the 1924 Games, where it hosted both ceremonies and competitions. Even if the stadium already existed, the 1924 Games were unique in that for the first time, some Olympic-specific infrastructure was constructed. This included the first ever Olympics-specific swimming and aquatics facility, which was the first to use the now common Olympic-size pools with a 50-meter lane length. However, to prepare for this year's Olympiad, 95% of venues are existing venues, saving the city on having to build new facilities for every event. Paris 1924 was also the first Games to introduce the now standard Olympic Village to house all the visiting international delegations. Meanwhile, a century later, when it comes to the Olympic Village for 2024, the name is a little misleading, since it'll seem more like a big city. Home to more than 14,000 athletes, coaches, staff, trainers, and media throughout the events, the village will have medical facilities to treat any accidents, and of course kitchens to keep the Olympians fueled up by serving somewhere around 60,000 meals every single day. Hey, all that sport is bound to work up an appetite. Sports and events. Speaking of those athletes inhabiting the Olympic Village, they're not just hanging out in Paris to take in the sights, visit the Eiffel Tower, and enjoy a baguette. The spirit of human competition defines the Olympics, and that's where sports and the events take center stage. At the 1924 competition, there were a total of 126 different events, less than half of the 329 events we'll see in 2024, and featured classics like weightlifting, gymnastics, equestrian, and tennis. Paris 1924 saw the debut of canoe sprint as a new demonstration sport, which was later adopted as an official Olympic competition. While those games introduced one sport, it was also the end of another. Paris 1924 became the last time rugby would feature at the Olympics until 2016. Team USA won the rugby finals by beating the host nation France, sparking unrest in the crowd and a borderline riot, leaving rugby off the docket for more than 90 years. Now, when it comes to Paris 2024, fans will get to watch some new age competition as well. It will be just the second ever Olympics for a few events like skateboarding, rock wall climbing, and surfing. And it'll be a first time ever showing for breakdancing, officially titled Breaking for the Games. The event was a massive hit at the 2018 Buenos Aires Summer Youth Olympics, earning its way to the big stage for 2024. and a global audience will watch competitors break new ground while busting a move. While wrapping your head around breakdancing as an Olympic sport, take a second to hit that subscribe button. Just like Olympic athletes are part of a team, you can be part of ours. Now, back to the games. Technological advancements. The 1924 Paris Olympics was the first event of its kind to be broadcast with live play-by-play on the radio. Until the invention of television, live wireless audio was the hottest and most accessible tech at the time to broadcast information. And what better use than the Olympic Games? The Games were also covered by print media for newspapers and magazines, with more than 1,000 accredited journalists relaying the action back to their homes. At Paris 2024, that number will balloon to an estimated 6,000 journalists covering the action, the least of which will be radio and print coverage, since we now have live streaming, high-definition visuals, audio, and analysis of each event as it happens. The use of technology in the competition itself has evolved in the last century too, as we've moved on from using chronographs and handheld stopwatches to track speeds and times. Today, cycling competitions use radio frequency identification tags to track rider times. Swimmers in aquatic competitions have times and distances tracked through wrist transponders, and the high drama photo finishes of track and field are tracked with digital recording tech and precise lasers to count right down to every thousandth of a second. These days, the only reason you'll have to check your watch is so you don't miss the start of your favorite event. Social and cultural impact. On the heels of World War I, the 1924 Paris Olympics became an epicenter of the post-war sentiments of a rebuilding globe. At the time, women had been competing in the Olympics since the turn of the century in 1900. But in France, women didn't even have the right to vote until 1944. The growing push for equality of the sexes was reflected in the total number of female athletes competing at Paris 1924, doubling up the 65 women from the previous 1920 Games to having 135 women competing in Paris. Progressive as it was for the times, the women still only totaled 135 out of the more than 3,000 participants. This year, the number of total athletes were more than triple from a century ago to over 10,000 Olympians. But things have evened up. Paris 2024 is set to be the first ever Olympics with full gender parity, an exact 50-50 split of male and female athletes. It took a century, but it's better late than never. Economics and logistics. The Olympics as a whole are a massive undertaking that requires an amazing amount of investment, time, and effort. So getting a return on that investment after the closing ceremonies can be tricky. After the 1976 Summer Olympics in Montreal, it took 3 decades to repay the $600 million it cost to fund the Games, a staggering amount of money at the time. But the most expensive Summer Games ever was Rio de Janeiro 2016. Which racked up a $13 billion US price tag and ended up losing $2 billion overall. Long-term use of buildings and venues is key to getting the most out of the money spent, and Paris 1924 managed to do just that. For example, the Tourelle pool built for the 1924 swimming events is still used today, although it's no longer up to Olympic standards. For Paris 2024, there were 3 arenas constructed specifically for these Olympics: the BMX Stadium, the Aquatic Center, and the Le Bourget sport climbing venue. That last one will be home to 5 climbing walls for rock climbing events, 1 inside and 4 outside, and along with the Aquatic Center is built to remain as a permanent community fixture. Who knows, Paris might really get their money's worth if the Olympics come back for another round in another 100 years. Security challenges. With the eyes of the world tuned in to watch the Olympics, for Paris officials, the concern is for all the people who show up in person. Security for athletes, fans, press, and international dignitaries is always a top concern when the numbers are so large, and in fact was even a big concern at the Paris 1924 Games. Back then, the Games organizers originally envisioned one single colossal event center to house the Olympics from start to finish, and months of debate took place on whether or not to construct a 100,000-seat stadium in Paris. In the end, the plan was axed due to concerns about policing, patrolling, and maintaining order in a crowd of that size over the 2-month schedule of the Games. Fast forward to Paris 2024, and 3 times that many people are expected to attend the opening ceremonies alone, never mind the rest of the events. To prepare for the crowds, France officially passed the Olympic Games law in May 2023 to allow the use of AI-driven and biometric security surveillance to keep an eye on things. They'll also keep the peace the old-fashioned way with 30,000 security guards 18,000 military soldiers, and 35,000 police officers on patrol, keeping everybody safe and secure to focus on enjoying their favorite sports. Legacy and future outlook. Although much smaller in scale compared to any of today's games, the lasting legacy of Paris 1924 will be how big it was for its time. More than 625,000 fans flocked to Paris to take in the events, with 44 countries sending teams. Paris 2024 is expecting close to 15 million people during this year's Olympics to watch athletes from just over 200 nations compete. But Paris 2024 has its eye on the future in other ways. This year's games are built with climate and sustainability in mind. 7 venues are only temporary, including the Opening Ceremonies grandstands along the Seine River, and will leave no footprint when the Olympics are over. Structures have steel plates underneath to protect the ground at historic squares, monuments, and statues, and the infrastructure is intentionally located away from trees and vegetated areas. As it turns out, one thing sticking around long-term will be the Olympic Village. After the Games, the housing at the Olympic Village will convert into a permanent neighborhood that includes shopping, landscaped gardens, parks, green spaces, 2,000 homes, and a hotel alongside business and office space. Maybe the legacy of Paris will be carried on best by the coming generations that can say they are literally living in it. In the span of 100 years, we've gone from the silent movie to streaming films on Netflix and Disney+, from AM radio to Spotify, and from the Model T to the EV. I mean, television still hadn't even been invented in 1924. Fast forward from the 1920s to the 2020s, and life looks way different for fans of the Olympics. Maybe the next time the Olympics are in Paris, future Olympians might think our smartphones, tablets, and Wi-Fi are just as old-fashioned as we think 1924's AM radio was. What do you think future Olympics might look like? And if you're just excited for this year's competition, leave us a comment and stay right here for another Now and Then video. Just keep on watching.